Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Hornsby. I work in University Registrar Services. I work on the Reg Tech team, we call ourselves. And I've worked here since 1991 in various roles. But I've been in Reg Tech for 18 years now. So I'm here to talk to you about the student profile tables. I hope that's what you're all here to learn about. So I'm going to tell you what the student profile tables are and why we have them. And then we'll focus on some of the different types of data that people like to get out of those tables. The various fields related to the enrollment status, term statistics, which is things like GPA and credit hours, the new returning continuing status and how that's calculated and what we use it for. The major, college, and campus. If we have time, we can drill into the primary record flags. You can learn about what's primary and why, and how to get to the non-primary, and then the snapshots. Okay, so you don't need to read this. I just want to let you know that the documentation is available in Google Drive. It's open to everyone at ASU. If you search for student profile, you'll find these documents. But the link is in my slide deck, and when these get published, you'll be able to get to it from there. The one on the left is like a white paper. It's just an overview of what is student profile, what is the timing of it, what records are in it, what records are not, when is it refreshed, all of that good stuff. And then the document on the right is an Excel sheet that just lists all of the fields, some sample values of what you might find in those fields, and then the English description of the logic. It's not the SQL, it's sometimes I call it SQLese. It's just the English, how and why is it calculated. So in 2007, ASU implemented PeopleSoft. Before that, we had a legacy SIS system. When we implemented PeopleSoft, we got all of these new tables that nobody was familiar with, and they were dispersed throughout the database. It is a relational database. And what I loved about it is UTO, they were UTO at the time, loaded it all to data warehouse. Any data we said we needed, put it in the data warehouse, you can go get it, which was great. But most of these tables were effective dated. Anyone who builds queries knows that if you have an effective dated table, now you've got to create a subquery to pull whichever effective date it is you want. Current record, the record as of the start, the record as of the term end, whatever it is you need, it's all there, but it takes a little extra work to get to it. And so data that used to be simple in our very limited data warehouse that we had before that was now, we're drowning in data, it's all there, but it was more difficult to get to than most people could handle. It also meant that if someone in Department A wrote a report and someone in Department B wrote a report and they used slightly different logic, they got different results, and that caused confusion all over the place. Reports that we used to have to provide back then might have 25, 30, 40 tables in them just to get the basic data, and it was crazy. So we decided to build what we call the student profile tables. We used to have a student profile table in the legacy data warehouse, so we built a new one with the PeopleSoft data. We included all of the fields that the old one had, some new fields that we didn't have before PeopleSoft. And it was a group of people who built this together who used to know the details of the legacy data student profile table, and now we're learning how to do it in PeopleSoft. So we all worked on it together. It was a real fun project. The purpose was to be able to generate enrollment tracking reports, which is head count by major and campus that goes to leadership, at least on a weekly basis. But we also wanted just to make all of the data easier to get to. So we wanted it to be simplified. We wanted it to be easy to use for consistent reporting. We also pulled in the fields with the same logic that institutional analysis uses in the student term enrollment table. Has anyone used that? It's one of my favorite tables ever. It's so easy to use. It's clean. It's nothing is really inconsistent in that table. It's beautiful. So student profile is kind of like, let's see, how would I say this? Student profile is the messy data in the transactional system before we get to the 21st day, when it can be all cleaned and normalized and made easy to use. But it's still better than using the base tables. So student profile is where we go to get a student's major. It's all simplified and easy to get to there. Their enrollment status, their residency status. That's the only place in PeopleSoft where we calculate, store new, returning, and continuing, aside from census, which isn't in PeopleSoft. We brought in all of the term statistics that we thought were relevant from the student car term table. We also have the academic level, their academic standing, which means probation or disqualification. And then we have a few graduation fields. So all of that is together in one table. There is a pre-built report in analytics that's just a data dump of the student profile tables. One is by term. So when you run it, it'll prompt you for a term and it gives you all 300,000 rows if that's what you want. And then the other one is student profile current, and that's the currently active students, and it doesn't have any term related data in it. It's just their program and plan data. So those are available for you to run if you have access to records and enrollment in analytics. So these are the three tables that we're looking at today. The first two are term-based tables. They were the ones that we built in 2010. Student profile major by term and student profile by term. Students only exist in those tables if they're term activated. Term activation is a feature in PeopleSoft. It's the way we say, are you admitted for that term? Is your record active? If so, we term activate you. And the student has to be term activated before they can register for classes. So for example, a future admit can't register for fall, this fall, because they're not term activated for fall. So that's the driving table right there. In PeopleSoft, that term activation table is called student car term. It has all of the term statistics. All of the term statistics in student profile come directly from that. So the student has to exist in that table before they exist in either of these first two tables. But at ASU, we let students have multiple majors. We let them have minors and certificates. They can be currently enrolled in one major and admitted to a future program for next semester. So we have all of those multiples in the program plan stack, and those are the tables. They're also in data warehouse. Those are the effective data tables. So because students can have all those multiples, the first table, the one called student profile major by term, pulls in all the multiples that are active as of that term start. So it wouldn't have the future admit in it. It would just have the records that they're active for in that term. And then we have flags that we flag the primary plan, the primary program, and the primary career. And when all of those are primary for a student, that's their primary record. So there's one flag you can pick to get one row per student. But it does have all the granularity of all the non-primary things in it. The other thing to know is all of the major related data, the program plan, subplan, all of that is pulled from PeopleSoft in the term-based tables is only seeing the record that is active as of the term start using those effective dates. So this semester started on August 18th. If an advisor changes the student's major today and they use today's date, which is the default, then that major change is not effective until next semester. However, when the advisor does that, they are able to backdate it if they want. If the student needs to be in that program for this semester, either for meeting prerequisites, so seats are reserved for students in this major and they need one of those seats, they backdate it. That also impacts the student's tuition and fees. And so it's usually only done when they know the student is supposed to be in that program, then they'll backdate it. So knowing all of that, we know the enrollment engine is driven by the effective date and tuition calc is driven by the effective date. For enrollment reporting, we pull the record that was active as of the term start using those effective dates. This is just for enrollment reporting, which was one of the primary purposes of these tables, was for enrollment reporting. And so we decided to mirror the logic on what the actual enrollment engine was doing. We could have picked any date, but that's the date we picked, yes.
If they backdate it back to the beginning of the term start date, then it will show up in this table, is that right?
Exactly, yes, yep. And advisors that are updating the records, they know that. They know that they have to backdate it if it's necessary, and they know if the student shouldn't be charged the extra fees this semester because they're really not in the program until next semester, then they don't backdate it. And if the student gets a bill for their tuition, and they'll go right back to the advisor, then we'll ask the registrar's office to fix it. And we do. Okay. Okay, so for that reason, all of this is as of the term start, everything that's effective dated. So the student profile major by term has multiples for each student in the term with the flags that I just described, and I'll show you them in a minute. The student profile by term table only has one record per student in the table. That's the only granularity. So it's anything that's true about that student in the term that couldn't be different based on being active in 2 careers at once or 2 majors at once. So one example of that is whether they're an athlete. There's an athlete flag in there. That's true, regardless of their major. It's either a yes or a no. The same thing with, we have an enrollment flag hold in there. It's yes or no. If a student has an enrollment hold, it blocks all enrollment. It's not specific to a career. So student profile major by term will have multiple rows per student per term, and we use the flags to get that down to 1 row if that's what you need. But student profile by term is just 1 record per student. Then about 5 years later, we decided that's great. We like this table, we like the fields in it, but sometimes we actually need to see the student's major as of today. So that major change that wasn't backdated today, we want to see that too. And we want to pull that student into that major on the report instead of the one that was active in August. So we basically replicated all the logic for student profile major by term, except we pulled out term activation. So none of the term related data is in there, and it's as of today's date. So you can get the current major. Let's see, what else should I say about that? Oh, the student profile major current only contains records for students that are currently active in something. If they're not admitted yet, they're not in the table. If they graduated, they're not in the table anymore. They disappear. So the 2 term related tables only contain records for students that are term activated. Again, you have to be term activated before you can register for classes. It's tied to a term using either the S term if the data is natively already tied to a term, or effective date if not. These tables only include the careers that we use in enrollment reporting, which is undergrad, grad, and law. There was a lot of reasons why non-credit was excluded, mainly because what's now Global Launch, but it wasn't called that then, was maintaining their own records with their own policies and procedures, and we didn't have enough visibility into decisions that they made, for example, backdating or not. We didn't know anything about what they were doing, so we didn't need them on enrollment reports, and so they were left out. The other table, student profile current, has that career in it. So the non-credit career is the non-accredited programs. So non-credit is non-accredited that are offered through Global Launch. Originally, 15 years ago, it was the American English and Culture program, but now it's a lot more than that. So the first 2 tables that I showed you on the previous slide don't have that career in it, but the 3rd table does. Also in Data Warehouse, the student profile tables go back to spring of 2005. And I'll get into that in a minute. Does anyone in here use ODS? So here is a look at one student's record. This is just an example. This is one student's record in the student profile major by term. I don't know how to hide this closed captioning live thing. Oh, okay. It's covering the screen, but maybe if I talk slow, it'll shrink. Okay. So this is one student's record. You can see some of the data you might recognize looks like it's related to a student's major. So their career, there's a plan code. There's a really nice, it's called transcript description in PeopleSoft, but I like to just relabel that their major. That's what that is. I'd like to say there was a lot of thought that went into the order of the fields in this table, and there was, but there was 4 or 5 people voting on it. And so now you get what you get. That's what it is. Okay, so I basically already told you this. In order to be in the student profile term tables, you have to be term activated. To be term activated, a student has to be admitted for that term, or they have to be continuing from an earlier term and still meet the quick reentry or continuous enrollment requirements for their career. They also have to be active still. So if we graduated them or they're discontinued due to non-enrollment, they're not term activated. This is the main reason why we don't term activate for a future term until the 21st day of the current term, because we have to wait for students to have a chance to register before we know if they've met the continuous enrollment requirements. So we wait until the 21st day. And then on the 22nd day, students that haven't been enrolled for the continuous enrollment requirement for their career are discontinued, and that inactivates their program plan stack. And as soon as we're done with that, we term activate for the upcoming semester. So that's why there's a pause. That's why new admits for the future don't always have an academic level or credit hours posted, because we have to wait until we've passed the 21st day. Here are some fields that are related to a student's enrollment status. After we term activate, what I just described, a student could apply to graduate, and now they're not going to be here anymore in that future term. If they apply to graduate in a term that's before the term they're already term activated for, we flip the eligible to enroll flag from yes to no, and that stops them from registering. That's the only way that we can stop them from just registering after they've graduated. That's the main reason why that flag would be no. That doesn't mean that the student doesn't have other holds that would prevent them from registering. That just means their academic record is eligible to register. And for us, that basically means they're not graduating before that term. The enrollment status, what do you think E means? I don't have any prizes, but I promise it's not a hard. Enrolled, yes, very good. Enrolled. W means they dropped all of their classes and they have at least 1 W grade on their transcript. D means they dropped all of their classes before the date where it would show on their transcript, and so they're truly what you would think of as a drop. And then N means there's no record of enrollment for that semester. It's not a flag, but it's a pretty easy way to get to identify who's enrolled. After they register, we populate the first registered date for the semester. Sometimes that's interesting. This example, the student is not withdrawn, so that's just the display of no withdrawal date. Over in the right, you see the academic load. F means full-time. It's at the top. I don't know if these controls are blocking it. And then we also thought it would be helpful sometimes to do a count of how many classes that student is registered for. So we've got the class count. We have the total units that are being taken for progress versus audit. That's the difference between those two fields. If they have any grades posted, then you see this example, the student has at least 1 grade posted because they have 3 hours that are earned for progress. 3 hours counting in their GPA this semester, and then they've attempted 15 hours this semester. Yes.
When you say audit, is that like guards audit or is that something else?
Good question. No, audit is a grading option that students have. An example would be a student who took a math class 10 years ago and they need it now for the next class. They meet the prerequisite, but they need a refresher. They can't take it again for credit, so they can take it for audit. They won't get a grade though. They still have to pay tuition, so it's not a popular choice, but it's an option. So here's sample data from about 25 students from fall of 2022. This is just the enrollment fields that I just described. It's just a dump to show you what it might look like for a list of students. About 10 rows down, you see a student who had a term withdrawal posted. And the reason is a medical withdrawal. Those are really the only withdrawals that we post while the term is still in session. Otherwise, a student who completely withdraws won't have the withdrawal date or the reason populated until about 2 weeks after the semester is over, because they can still add session B and they can drop and add and drop and add and drop and add. So we just wait until the end. You can see all the academic loads and then all the counts of all the different units. Now this is the same fields, but it's for one student over all of their terms going back to 2015. So this student withdrew from summer of 2018. That reason code SWDR just means student withdraw. It just means the student did it. What else is interesting here? Is there anything interesting you want to know about?
What's the D again? I apologize if I didn't mention. In the ASU enroll status, and you have NE and D.
Yes, D means they dropped all their classes, but they don't have any W grades. So the term doesn't even show on their transcript. The W means they have at least one W grade and it shows on their transcript. It'll show with the course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you just go over the taken progress, past progress again?
Sure. Taken progress means they're registered for it. Past progress means a grade has been posted. And then the GPA, unit GPA means that's the number of hours going into their GPA for the semester.
And you said those don't include audits, right? If it said progress, those credits don't include audits.
Correct. Unit taken progress does not count for their total hours earned at the university. So they're split out into those two. Yes.
Academic load, I'm assuming F is that full time,
Yes.
but I don't know what the other ones are.
T is 3/4 time. H is half time. N is no status. And L is less than half time.
And is halftime 6?
It depends on the career, but yes, in general, 12 is full time, 6 is half time. It's different for grad and law students though.
Okay.
And these fields are coming directly from student car term. They're populated in this table every night. So if you use PeopleSoft, that's the term history page. If you're querying, it's directly from student car term.
Sorry.
Yes.
Student card term.
Student car term is the table behind term activation. So when we term activate a student, they get created in student car term. That's when they can register for classes. And it stores everything that is what I would consider to be a term statistic. So their credit hours. And this is only some of the credit hours in that table. There's a lot. Also their academic level. And those are things that aggregate over term, which is why I thought a view like this of one student would be interesting. So you can see what it looks like. Another thing is all the fields that start with UNT is for that term. So 15 units in that term or 12 units in that term. But there's other fields that are not in the screenshot. I couldn't fit everything in here that start with TOT for total, and that's the cumulative. So UNT is that term. TOT is the cumulative. So here are those fields for a student. You can see the UNT units right here. And below that is the total cumulative, the total taken GPA, the total past progress. So Total past progress could be different than the total taken GPA, because if they fail a class, it goes in total taken GPA, but not in the total past progress. So CUR GPA is their term GPA. So this student had, what did I say? 1 grade posted so far, probably 3 credit hours is probably 1 grade. I guess it was an A because their GPA is a 4. And then you can see their academic level too, if the live transcript stops covering it. At the beginning of the term, they're a sophomore, and at the end of the term, they have enough credit hours posted already that they're a sophomore, a junior. The projected is hidden by the captioning right now, but that is what the academic level was projected to be at the start of the fall. And that is what is used for prereqs. So when you look at a prereq and it says juniors and higher, it's that projected level that's being used there. Okay, so here's more term statistics for a few students. Is there anything in here you noticed that you want me to explain? You notice the GPA goes above a 4.0. We actually cap it at 4 on transcripts, and on the grade, you know, all of that it's capped, but in the database, it actually displays what it was. Here's one. This is one of my favorites, the reset cum stats. When a student graduates, we reset all their cum stats. They start over again with 0, so that if they get a second bachelor's degree, their GPA is starting over. It's the same thing if they graduate with a master's degree and they go on for a doctoral. So that reset cum stats is what resets everything. The problem is that in student CAR term, you can't see that on the current term. You have to drill back through all the history to find, was there a reset cum stats? And that was annoying. So we just rolled it forward. And so in student profile, we populated on all the subsequent terms so that it's super easy to know that that's what happened. So this student that's on the row that has reset cum stats, that means their cum stats were reset at the beginning of the semester. That's the code 2227 for this semester. And then over here in the academic level, you see their post-bac. This is sample data for one student over many terms. So this student started as a freshman. They jumped right from a freshman to a junior in 1 semester. They probably had their transfer work posted. And then they were a senior, and then they graduated. And they did come back. They have a few terms over here with a status of E as a post-bac, so I can tell they enrolled again after that. And you can see the reset cum stats is populated starting on that term and then all the way down.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yes.
It looks like there's 1 row for each term. Does this just mean this was their status at the end of the term or the beginning of the term? What does each row signify?
It depends on the field. This is their record now for that term. I don't know how to, I don't have the English words to describe what I mean, but
The most recent data for that? term?
yes, exactly. Thank you. That was big help. So if we went back and changed a grade for fall of 2021, it would be visible here. You would see the credit hours change and the GPA and everything. Okay, now my favorite part, new, returning, and continuing. Does anyone want to hear about this? Or should we skip it? New, returning, and continuing is used for a lot of processes. A lot of times we implement a policy that impacts new students. Implement this for new students, or, you know, we focus a lot on retention of last year's cohort. So we need to go back and know who was new last year. So this is why we use this calculation. We've always had it. This logic was, I don't want to say the same, but it is what institutional analysis does at the 21st day to identify new, returning, and continuing. We use the same logic, except we're applying it in the transactional system. So it's pretty messy, But as we get close to the 21st day, the students that are flagged new, returning, and continuing here pretty much match what ends up being in the census too. Then once we know who's new, if they're an undergrad, we give them a new undergrad type. So that's where we flag the first year students and the new transfer and the new non-degree. We also have a type right now that we're putting on reports, but it's not going to show in this field, and that's the new visiting students. The only way you can get to them is by knowing that they're new and then looking at the plan code. There's an actual single plan code for visiting students. So here is how we calculate who is new, and I don't know how to show you the top of the screen, but that's what this slide is for. This is about how to know if a student is new, whether they're a first year student, transfer, or non-degree. So if the student is new and they're not non-degree, and they're not a standalone certificate, and they're not a visiting scholar, and their high school diploma is the same year as their fall year that they were new, or they have less than 12 credit hours after their high school diploma, they're new. They're a first year student. Otherwise, they're a transfer. If they're non-degree, standalone certificate, or a visiting scholar, then we flag them as non-degree here. We just implemented standalone certificates about a year ago. Now we have associate's degrees too. All of that is addressed in our logic to flag the first year students. I know I didn't say very well the part about the high school diploma. Do you want me to explain that again better? So if a student was new this fall and they graduated from high school in 2022, they're a first year student. Doesn't matter how many credit hours they have. They're a first year student. If they didn't graduate in 2022, then we look at how many transfer credit hours they have between their high school graduation and ASU. If that's 12 or greater, then they're a transfer student.
Is that the same calculation as that admissions is using for admit type, or is this like the same words but a different like attribute?
Great question. Slightly different. For admission purposes, they have to apply the admission requirements established by the Board of Regents. And so it doesn't always match with how we report NRC. I'm just going to call it NRC. My tongue is getting tired. But for the most part, they are the same. And for the admissions reports, what is the admission funnel report called? The report that shows how many applied, how many are admitted, how many are enrolled. And that report, once the student is admitted and term activated, they use this table instead of the admit type. So they kind of flip it to match. So now how do you know who's new, who's readmit, and who's continuing? The easiest part is to say if they have never been here before, well, they're obviously new. If they've been here before, then it gets a little more complicated. So new means they were not here before and some other things. Readmit, we relabel that returning because we don't require many students to be readmitted anymore, but in the table, you'll see it's readmit instead of returning. And that means they've been here before, but they weren't here last semester. So last semester right now would be last spring. They would have had to have been here fall or earlier. And then continuing means they were here last term, spring. When we're checking to see if they were here or not, there's all sorts of rules. I don't think we have time to get into today, but basically it means they are still enrolled or they were enrolled and are withdrawn with a W grade. We only care about prior fall and spring terms. Summer is a bonus. It's not required. The enrollment has to have been state funded. Now there are only a few programs that are not state funded. Those are contract classes. Common ones are the MBA Shanghai program. Another example is the ULCs. MOOC classes, those are not state funded. So when we look at the prior enrollment, it has to have been a state funded class. Also ASU 10 is not state funded. The enrollment has to be at the same education level. So in PeopleSoft, there's a thing called the education level. A 10 is Associate of Arts. 11 is Associate of Applied Arts. 13 is Bachelor's. 15 is JD. 17 is Master's, and 21 is PhD. So when we're looking at the prior enrollment, we're comparing the education level now with what they were then. That's how a student who was a master's student and now is the PhD is new again when they start their PhD program. We also have these programs for visiting scholars and exchange students. And the thing about that is they're not planning to graduate from ASU. They're in a degree program. They look like they're in that major, but we know from the get-go that they're not graduating from ASU. They're just here usually for one semester or 1 year. So all of those students get put in student groups, which then get flagged in student profile. And then if the student is new, they are not counted as a first-year student because that would impact our retention rates. We know they're not graduating, so the way we get them out is we use those student groups. And in student profile, there is a field called exchange student, and we put visiting scholars in there too at the same field. So sometimes a visiting scholar comes back a few years later, and now they really are going to graduate from ASU. We take them out of the student group, and then they'd probably be a new transfer. Okay, so here is a diagram of how we calculate NRC. This is very high level. There's some more detail that goes into it that's not here, but this is just basically the questions that you would ask looking at a record to decide, is the student new, continuing, or readmit. How am I doing on time? 20 minutes, okay. Here is the major related data for one student again. So this is an undergrad majoring in English, Bachelor of Arts. You can see there's this plan type and a plan type description. So you'd be able to find minor certificates, standalone certificates, all of those, you'd be able to differentiate those fields. Here's the education level I was just describing. We have the number, and then the description is also in the table. And then the NRC. Then here are the primary record flags that I said are in this table. This example, the student doesn't have any non-primary plan codes, but the ASU primary record flag is only Y when it's the primary career program and plan. So if this student adds a minor, the Bachelor of Arts in English is still their primary, and the minor would be non-primary. Yes?
What if they have double majors?
Good question. If they have double majors in the same career, then the student CAR term table already identifies what is primary.
How do they determine what's primary?
Good question. I love your questions. By default, it's the lowest career number. So if English was career number 0 and math was career number 1, English is primary. It's usually the program they got admitted to first because it starts at 0. So it will automatically term activate them for that program. That program then is used for all sorts of other things. It's used for advising rules. It's used for tuition calculation. It's used for academic standing at the end of the term because well, math and English wouldn't have different rules, but let's say English and engineering. Engineering might have slightly higher rules for academic standing. And so when we evaluate them to put them on probation or not, we can only run them through one set of rules, and that primary program in student CAR term, which then gets carried over here to student profile, is what's used to say that's primary. So that's the primary program. The primary plan is the plan that's the most major. So major and a minor, the major is primary. If there's a major and a cert, the major is primary. If there's, What else? Well, we defined all of the hierarchy of what the plan codes, plan types, what becomes primary. Every once in a while, we have a student that is in 2 majors on the same career number, and that's a data error. That happens all the time. And when that happens, we pick the first plan code in alphabetical order. Okay, so those, the primary career is a little more complicated. If a student is in 2 careers in the same term, the first thing we check is which one has enrollment. Did they attach classes to their grad career or their undergrad career? Whichever one they enrolled in is primary, unless they enrolled in both, because they can enroll in both in the same term. If they enroll in both in the same term, then we look to see which one is degree seeking. If one is degree seeking and one is non-degree seeking, then the degree seeking is primary. If both are degree seeking or both are non-degree seeking, then we have a primacy. Law takes priority over grad, takes priority over undergrad. And there's nothing in the system that does that. It was just a business decision that we made, again, following what institutional analysis would do, and we built it into this table. So when all of those flags are Y, then the primary record is Y. That means you can use this table to get any student who's in any plan code, whether it's their primary or not, but when you want to know what their primary is, you can use all of these flags. You guys can sit over here. If you want to come up front, you'll have to come up here to get through. Let's see. So here is NRC data for about 25 fall students. These are all different students. I sorted it undergrad, grad, and law, so you can just see what that looks like. Do you have any questions about NRC yet? Yes.
So I have the enrollment retention data, and I'm a little confused about, because in these columns you will see, so I usually filter the new and then I see the freshman, but sometimes I see there are other academic level in there, and it looks like you have a couple of columns that have the academic level. Which one should I take for my retention data, that if I say fall 2022?
It depends. The new undergrad status where it says freshman, I should also explain, we used to call these first-time freshmen. We don't call them freshmen anymore. They're first-year students. But you know how engineers are. We're not going to go and change this table. We just don't call them freshmen anymore. We call them first-year students. These columns that are highlighted in yellow most closely resemble what will be the cohort that you need to focus on for retention. It's not the census data yet, but it is the same logic, and it's going to pretty much match. It's based on if they graduated from high school in 2022, or if they have less than 12 credit hours after high school, which is the same thing that defines the first year cohort for census, which then is the retention cohort. The academic level is not. That's just how many credit hours the student has accumulated from ASU test scores or transfer credit. So we often have, sorry, I just said it. We have first year students who are here for the first time. They graduated from high school in June, and they're already a senior. And that's from dual enrollment, that's from AP credit, IB, all of that, plus maybe summer school. All of that coming in can make them a senior, even if this is their first term in high school, college, sorry. So the ones that are highlighted are probably what you want.
So I need to.
Here's an example of a visiting scholar right here, the student group. This student isn't new, but if they were, you would see non-degree instead of continuing. Oh, up at the top, the first student is another exchange student. So you see their new non-degree, even though their major is global studies. They're in a bachelor's program, but we know they're not graduating from ASU. Oh. Here is data for a single student over time. So starting in the summer of 2015 through next spring of 23, you can see they started as a new freshman. They didn't enroll that first summer term. They enrolled that next fall term. So the next spring term, they were continuing. You can also see they went from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and then a graduate student. You can see they were new again when they started over as a graduate student. So that's what that looks like. Here's just a whole bunch of major related data from a few fall students. I don't know if there's anything you want to ask about. Anything look interesting? You can see I had to squeeze it to even fit this.
Do you have a place where I can go and see all these terminologies or any of these short forms, all that?
Yeah, the Google Docs that I had on one of the earlier slides. If you're in Google Drive, just search for student profile. The Google Sheet that you'll find is going to be all of the fields and then an English description of what you would use it for, what it means. And then if that's not enough, if you want the actual SQL that goes with it, we do have a document like that I can share with whoever needs that. Okay, now I can't tell what this slide was supposed to be either because of I feel so incompetent sometimes. Let's see, what is this? I can drag this out of the way for a second, right? Oh, effective dates. Okay, so this is a student's program plan stack showing the effective dates. This is one student in the undergrad career who has one career number. So this is a very simple example. You can see the effective dates and the effective sequence. This set of tables will allow more than one record to be saved on the same date. So that's why there's the effective sequence as well. So you can see the student applied, was admitted, was matriculated. They never changed their major, which is fascinating. And then they applied to graduate. And you can see as they progress through the degree checkout statuses. And then AW, what do you think that means? Awarded, very good. I wish I had prizes. It was awarded and their graduation term was spring of 2018. Now here's an example. Oh, I guess I won't go back. You guys will be able to see this. This is an example of another student. And in this example, the major change was backdated. And I didn't call out the relevant fields on the previous slide, but basically you see the action date, the change was made on January 31st, but then the effective date was January 5th. So that was the day before the term start. They dated it one day prior. So that's how academic units can backdate a major change. That makes this change, which was, they added a minor is what they did. And that minor is effective for spring of 2018. So if that student needed to be in, what's that minor? I don't know what MIS is. Whatever that minor was, in order to be able to be eligible to register for a class, let's say it had a prereq or reserved seats, that would make them eligible for it. Any questions about effective dates? Yes.
So this was a change for spring. So if they needed to enroll in a class for that minor for fall, they would need to backdate it to make that possible?
For the prior fall?
No, the next fall.
No, they don't have to backdate it if they want it to be effective for the upcoming term. They can just use today's date. They only have to backdate it if they need it to be effective for a term that already started. We, in the training for academic advisors, we give them what we call best practice effective dates. And it's basically, you don't need to pull out the academic calendar to look up the term start date. We just recommend they use January 1st for spring, May 1st for summer, and August 1st for fall. Then they don't need to look anything up, because unless something major happens, our term dates are going to start after those days anyway. Oh, here are some records of students who have primary and non-primary records. So you can see when there's minors, what the flags look like. So this first student here has 2 majors. They have engineering and liberal arts. And then the liberal arts also has a minor on it. In student car term, the career number 0 for this student was flagged as primary. And so in student profile, that's also primary, and that's the primary record, primary program over here. Then on the record for liberal arts that has the major and the minor, you can see the minor is non-primary and the major is primary. So again, when all 3 of these are Ys, that's the one record that is flagged as primary for that term. That's how those flags work. We carried over the same logic into the student profile major current, except term activation isn't required for that table. So it's kind of messy, but it's generally the same idea. So those are the primary record flags. I have to see, what did I put under here? Residency. Oh, residency is fun too. It's not effective dated, it's effective term. But they don't have a record for every term they're term activated. If they were a resident 2 years ago and they're term activated now, they're still a resident. So to avoid having to pull the max residency term for a student and rolling it forward to say this is a resident now, in student profile, we roll it forward. So whatever the last residency status was for that career is what you see here. And that makes it a lot easier to get to. Finally, we have expected graduation term. If a student applies to graduate, then that term is populated. If they've never applied to graduate, it's going to be a dash. If they applied to graduate and they don't meet, there's no way they're going to graduate and they're denied right away, then that's still going to be a dash. You won't even see it. At the end of the semester, when we're cleaning up graduation, if a student can't graduate and they don't roll forward to a future term, we withdraw the application while we wait for them to tell us what they want to do. And at that point, this would be set back to a dash as well. So the term is only populated if they've applied to graduate and they're not denied or withdrawn from graduation. And then once we post the degree, you'll see the completion term. We have 4 minutes left, so I did not make it through. I'm going to just say the student profile major current is also there. We have all these wonderful snapshots that I love. That snapshot all the data in these tables plus the student enrollment and class tables so that we can do point in time enrollment reporting. These are what all those tables look like. Here's what our snapshot dates look like. So now we have a few minutes for more questions. Yes.
Where did you say that the file was that explained the different terms? You said it was.
It's in Google Drive. If you search for student profile, you should be able to find it, but if not, I'll send you the link. It is shared with ASU. So.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm not able to find that as well.
Okay. I can send it to you.
Thank you.
And when the presentation is published, then the link will be on there too, but I'll give it to you if you wait after. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.